Hi, good evening. Can you all hear me all right? So we're going to start, this is the earliest of my pieces that was done at the Queen's Family Courthouse, and this is in Jamaica, not far from here. I made, as I always do, because I seem to have to do this, made the full-scale 4-story model out of cedar first. So this is the top of it. And these are the sleeves that actually hang out of this circular thing that was at the top. These are the vacuum-formed forms of each of the pieces that were done in wood first. So these are these are part of the sleeves. This is another part of the sleeve, and these are all separate sections, not yet painted. And this is the building of the dome-like structure that was underneath a 40 by 40 foot skylight. This was in the atrium of the building. And as you know, that family courthouses have things that are pretty emotionally horrid, so that I wanted them to have more light in that atrium, and it was a light without using lights, but using the sun that would get transmitted in a way that was not at all loud or didn't feel commercial, didn't feel gaudy, that it was a very gentle transmission of light down through the 4 stories, and it embraced both of the escalators, the up and the down escalator. And you can see that each of these were you can see some of the pieces, each of which was vacuum formed. So there are many, many separate vacuum formed pieces. This is another one that I did at the Madison Square Park Conservancy. It's I think all of you know that park. Again, a full-scale model of that structure that then got transferred or cast into resin. And this is the process of the casting. And of course, all of that steel guards the entire mold from moving. This is at the Walla Walla Foundry in Washington State. So this resin is all about light, what the sun does when it goes through it. It's translucency, not transparent. There were about 12 marriages that took place inside of it. And beautiful edging, because it was a rubber mold that it was cast from. So we were able to sort of pull the rubber mold from underneath things that actually felt like they were scales of a fish. Not that that's what they are at all, but I love, this sort of overlapping, very delicate thing that happened there. This is in Sweden, south of Sweden. This is another piece altogether that can have its corner placed into a corner of a room, or it can just be placed, as this one is, below the wherever on the wall. And it obviously is something that's very squeezed and then kind of lets itself go. So the installation of this is very particular. It's obviously not a grid, but it started to be somewhat of a grid, but became very loose. This is all cedar, and this is a piece that I started by gouging out the center of a bowl that I was building. That's this portion. And it's got a lot of shims that was stuck into it, very small shims, so it made it feel very, very used, like it had a history to it. And it's something that I wanted to imply a kind of movement. The service is extremely important in that there's a tuck in the bottom part of this thing that obviously indicates that there's weight there, that the movement is slow, that it's really that there's a real relationship to the floor. This is a close-up, and there's a shift that I make, and these surfaces, what I do with them is kind of my way of speaking, my way of taking a kind of control of what it is that I want to say. This is the other side, and as you see, it opens up, it tears itself open, and it sort of excavates from its inside something that kind of falls out of the inner part of the body. This is the piece that some of you might have seen at the Storm King Art Center. And I chose to put an appendage on it. This is the first time that I have done that. It's a solid piece. This appendage, I have this fantasy that this is in Polish, they call it something like pod pachą, which means under your armpit. And it's the place where you would carry these enormous loaves of bread, or you would carry your baby. So there's an intimacy about that space. And I thought of this, if you look at it in a certain way, as being a kind of framework for the colonnade of trees below. This is bronze, because the cedar could not take being minced in that thin a way. So it's bronze, and I patinaed it in a way so that it would make a very gentle transition to this appendage. And you see how kind of convoluted that appendage is, or how very sort of carnal and thick, sort of layered. Just so you get a sense of the scale. So the rest of it is all cedar with graphite, not much, a little bit of graphite in between those, in the crevices. This is another piece that's kind of horseshoe shaped with these sacs that kind of ooze out of its body. I placed these kind of marks of honor on either side, and they were plates that I made out of cedar as well that bent to the surface. But this I gouged and I ground so that it was like the nude skin of the cedar that was underneath. This is my studio, and I always keep things by my side that are not finished, that are just little nothings, but I feel like I need and want to look at them. I call these plates, but they're not plates, they're kind of large. And this is a piece that hung around my studio for a number of years, and it wasn't until I cut into this area and placed this more three-dimensional structure on it, that it started to make sense to me. So it often takes, my pieces often go through very dramatic changes. This was also cast from a full-scale cedar model with these little knobbies on them. And the knobbies looked almost frosted with the resin cast. So this part also is going to be process. And so I started building something, and I didn't really know where I was going to go with it. So you see these little drawings that I have on it. So this is already glued. And of course it looked really boring. So I slice into it, and I stick it full of shims. I just kind of shim it to death. But in the process of doing that, I can have different planes. Like this plane can be closer, and the one on the other side can, I can keep shifting those planes so that there's more life, more activity in the piece. And here I have not yet decided, so these are the shims. I have not yet decided what the front and the back are going to be like. So it's all intuitive decisions. I never make drawings for my artwork, and I never make, when I have to do something that has to be approved by a committee, I do it and I toss it away immediately. Like it's of no help to me. I never made drawings and I never make models. So I'm shaving off some of those shims. And I'm putting graphite on, but just gently, just so it's not sort of drowning in the black graphite. And I don't want it on the shims, hence I've taped them off. And this is the piece, but I still haven't figured out the head yet. And it's extremely important that it have this air underneath, because for me, it felt again as though it had some sort of life that was implied by that arched body. And I wish, like anything, I could have gotten rid of this thing, but I don't know. I think it's okay that it's got that to base it onto. So, and this is one side, and this is the other side. And you see what happens with all of the details. In order for me to, I must have made this head portion about 7 times. I kept ripping it off and starting over again. But you see what it needed. It needed all of these things kind of leading up to, what in my head was a kind of a head. Now this is something that I wanted to do for Todd Williams and Billy Tien when they were having a show in Venice that they invited a lot of architects to, and me as well. And they gave a box that Zoom Thor made. It was like a great, stable gray box into which this thing that you're going to be submitting to Venice can be placed or can be shipped. So I work with something called abaca paper in a place called Dieudonné. And here we are taking it off of the wooden relief that I made so that this abaca paper, when it's wet, gets tucked into the crevices. When it gets dry, we then take it off and pin all of them together so to reinforce the frames on the inside so that we can do that. That's the piece. That's the piece. That's the piece, just so you can get the sense of scale. And that's the one that I wanted to send them, but I didn't end up doing that. because I was afraid that, there were no guards and there were no windows in this building, and this is just paper. I was afraid I'd get it shredded in return. And all of the color that you see is what it drank from the cedar. And when I made the entire relief out of cedar first, I cut it up into 33 sections. And all of this actually fit into that itty-bitty box, that they gave me. But anyway, so this is another one that I did because I liked that one so much. I did a second one. I painted the relief black, but not much of it came out. But this is the process again, So it's basically white, which says that the cedar can only give that juice once. All right, this is me drawing on a piece that's going to be at the Barclays Center. That's the one that's there now. And the lines that you see that I draw is what I sent to the cutters who cut it with a circular saw. And we have a very special blade on that circular saw, and one has to be an extraordinary cutter in order to be able to cut all the jigs and all of the lines and all of the organic lines that I make on top of the 4x4. So we're building, this is the bottom of the Barclays Center piece. That's the cutter. And look at this, look at this is the bottom. Look at how very convoluted it is, which means that it's going to be implying a lot of activity as it goes to the top. So that's still that same piece. So that's the bottom and the top. And there's a guy by the name of David Berliner, and the director of the Brooklyn Museum came to the studio to see the model that I made for the Barclays Center. And this is what they saw. That's the bottom and that's the top. In other words, they saw the full scale thing. This is it this is the piece, the wooden piece, the version that got cast. This is at the Polish Artworks Foundry that's just upstate New York. This is the bronze. This is the beginning of the bronze, not the whole thing. And the bronze is growing. And these are the casts. This sand cast. This is all sand that's squeezed in there in a way that's tremendously tight. They do that with I-beams that they put around the box structure. And this is my piece, obviously, in here with all of these. You see these little things that you're going to see a lot of. That's one of my pieces sitting up. They're in donuts. All of them get placed one on top of the other with flat sides. And this is the bronze. And of course, you have to have all of these structures that hold it in place because bronze continues to change its form because of the tremendous heat that it's been exposed to if you just leave it without enforcing the form that it should stay in. That's the inside, and the inside gets very, almost like it was, pet a lot or like it was, ground a lot. That's the welders. They're all artists, and they're so good looking, these guys. It's more welding. And this is my first attempt at patina. I made only 2 other bronzes before I started working on this bronze. This is like maybe 20 years ago. I mean, so I went a little wild with the colors, and I couldn't believe that it was possible to get such a range of color And often when I was doing this, because I was so lost, I said, Ursula, just do it in black, just do that. But it came out, like this was every color, that I could almost put into it. So it came out looking in a way that was much more complex than it would if it were just black, or if I, stood with the honey-colored surfaces that they often put on bronze. And this is the piece being trucked to the Barclays Center, installed. It's under the canopy because the building is so enormous. I had to find a place where I wouldn't be completely swallowed up, so it's under the canopy. There's a place here that's for the touching that I deliberately made to feel kind of silky. And there's a door called the Geico door that many of the people enter. And the female guard said, "Are you Ursula?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I just wanted you to know that I've never seen people make out anywhere like they make out in front of your piece." See, that's success. Yeah, this oculus drove me crazy, but it is what it is. And I did find out, however, at night, and if any of you have seen that oculus, it's like their red is not just a red, it's really red, and their yellow is a really yellow. You can't walk by it or anywhere near it without your eyeball just being sucked out toward that color or toward that image. But anyway. So these are some of the pieces that I had at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And I'll just go through them kind of quickly. These are shovels. I come from a long line of peasant farmers. And it's really a long line because my brother just had his saliva tested, and it's for eastern part of Poland, southern eastern part of Poland, for many, 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 many generations, peasant farmers. So I have this thing for shovels, and I don't want to have this thing for shovels, but I do. And I've made many of them. These are probably the largest. And they both have their own environments. And I'll give you more close-up versions of it. This is, it's almost like it sucks itself out of its ground. That's the concave shape here. And then it sort of goes through a number of identities until it ends up with the one that's at the top that the viewer sees. That's another one that does the same thing. But on this one, I put the markings of our sneakers as we stepped onto the surface of the 4x4s that make for the ground of this shovel. And I drew around them and I carved out these places just to make the background feel lighter and easier. This is another piece that stood around for a long time, and it had a cross-like thing that I lopped off. It had these little balls that I sliced in half, put plaster in between. I'll show you a close-up. And it's huge, and I guess it's supposed to be a spoon. This is 35 feet in diameter, and it's 15 feet high. And the 4x4 boards are placed in a very irregular way, although you can't really tell, but this is my idea of a drawing that's done with a graphite stick and a chalk. These are, I just sewed these blankets and piled them up. And I'm kind of sorry I don't have a little bit of a bigger pile, but this is what it was. And I sew them, and after I allow them to dry. And sewing them needs to be done when they're wet. And this is the 4th stomach of the cow that I sew. And I took it because I'm always trying to find a way out of cedar. You know, every time I have my semi-truckload coming, I say, Ursula, enough. And it just, you know, and so I took on these intestines thinking, you know, you go take a disgusting road, you know, like something that might really make somebody, you know, cringe. And lo and behold, these are, it's like the most beautiful lace one could imagine. I mean, and they're great color. It's my kind of color too, so that didn't do it. So this is a kind of, it's in Polish, it's called maglownica. It is something that they used to take damp clothing, linen clothing, and linen used to be kind of rough, the way it was woven, at least when I was a child, and it had a corrugated surface. So these were all sort of, or almost like accordion surfaces, but they're all organic, so one was different from another. And that you would take this maglownica, and you would take like a wooden bat and roll the whatever it is, damp linen that you had, and you would rub against it to make it softer. Okay, that's not really what this is, you know, it's a little big, a little high, but I covered it with the intestine again that I then put a little bit of black graphite on top of. That's a piece at Yorkshire. Another one at Yorkshire Sculpture Park. This one's called Anastacio. This is again casting at College, casting. And this is the very top of the piece. That's a very important part. It took me a number of years to invent the process that you'll see that perforates the bronze. I wanted the bronze to feel lighter, and this is the 4-foot-high cast that has rubber underneath, that has ceramic on top, like ceramic shell on top, that's being held with aluminum piping. I then do a drawing on top of a huge plastic sheet that's about 8 feet by 4 feet high of the kind of structures that I want perforated on this, the top 4 feet of the piece that you'll see. So we're now appending the plastic on which I drew onto the wax form that has been cast, and we're cutting through it. These are an example of the cut, cast wax things that then get cast into bronze. And it's no easy thing to make sure that the bronze gets into all of these crevices, including these fingers. That's the piece. I'm putting the patina on, but the patina still doesn't look great, but it will. And then you get a sense of the colors, the beautiful colors that are possible. And unfortunately, you know, things change over time. You know, every bronze thing you see turns green. So I suppose that that's the fate of this, but for now, or at least, you know, for the next maybe 10 years or so, you know, we have something that's as alive and as lovely as this. So this is the installation of that piece at Yorkshire. That's it at night, but it's really not a very good photograph. It's not as gaudy as this. It's much more gentle, and it's like amber rays. It's not even rays, but it's just very gentle amber coming out of here. This is just way too dramatic. And that's the, yeah. And you see how it starts off small, and then it sort of builds itself up. Yes, I do burn my work too. And that's fairly recent, about 4 months ago. But it has to do with cleanup, and it has to do with things I just don't want to look at anymore. So it was a 4-day burn, and I couldn't really look at it, but I had, you know, my assistants. I did mark the ones that I wanted to get rid of. And that's my storage, and back there that you see. Besides that, I needed storage space. This is my last show, about 4 or 5 months ago. Okay, this is a piece, I've just started this, sort of ripping into the surface in this way, like I had a huge X there. And it's all different, you know, kinds of rips. You know, it's not, there isn't any kind of a system. I mean, it's a system, I guess, but it's not, I guess I want to say it's not made by a computer, it's made by my hands. It's another one of the abaca paper. And this is one that has an appendage, but a different kind of appendage. And I am gluing on the pattern that I want to cut out, because this white, this plastic, it has glue on one side and it's kind of plastic on the other side, and it makes for just enough of a difference in the surface so that when we cast this, it'll let me know what was marked to be cut into. Okay, so this is the cast of the lace that we cut, and that's the piece. And the Museum of Modern Art got it, and I'm hoping that they're going to put it in their garden, but they keep saying it depends on development, because development has these parties that has these white tents, so that they must make room for tents. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But for me to be able to permeate the bronze is like a huge thing, to make it feel lighter, to make it feel as though the light can go through it, the air can go through it. Oh, this is the piece that we just installed at the FBI in Miramar, just north of Miami. Just last week we installed it. And you can see it from the second floor. You see people looking up. I mean, there's paper everywhere because they needed that for the installation. This is a project that I'm working on with Todd Williams and Billy Tsien at Princeton. And this is the process of my building the full-scale cedar model. But it'll be in a different material, and I'll tell you what that is. So you see it gets wider as it gets to the top, but this one's very voluptuous, almost like Baroque, especially as it gets to the top. So this is the piece, the full-scale model of something that we're making out of copper. And the copper is quite thick. It's not quite as thick as the Statue of Liberty. But I remember when I gave my talk at Princeton, and it was this, like 22 people sitting around me, it just, like the thought of using copper, it rolled off my tongue in a way that was so easy that, that this is what I wanted to make it out of pounded copper. So here's the beginning of the pounding. So we cut these out in our studio, and they're patterns for each 4x4, and there are 3,900 4x4s in this piece. Okay, so that's that. This is the studio I had to get for this project, and these are the portions of my piece, and all of these things lying on top are the patterns for each of the 4x4s, and what they do in terms of their horizontal curves and vertical curves that pattern takes into account. We took bronze and made the forms that went around around each of the 4x4s, both, and where they ended. These are again the patterns with the copper cutouts underneath. And this is the beautiful patina that happens, and it happens with the pounding of the copper. You see, like this is a single 4x4 here. This is another 4x4 here. And then this is one, let's see. This is another 4x4. So they have seams on the inside that join them, both the top, the bottom, and the sides. They have seams. They get welded with a bronze rod. This is the bronze. And then the fire is the element that makes for these gorgeous colors. I'll show you more. And I can't hold on to these colors, I'm still trying to figure out a way of holding on to them, because even oxygen makes them different. But they're so alive now. This is the man, Richard Weber. Very, 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 very lucky that I ran into him. There are heroes in your life that you just happen upon that really, that you see as heroes, almost like right from the beginning, that end up doing your life in, But then there are other heroes who really become heroes, and this is what Richard Weber is. He's heading this project. This is a woman that works for him. She's been working on this now for over 2 years. Her name is Yunim, and she's spectacular. And all of which was learned from Richard Weber. And these are her hands, and that's my talk.